Let the sunshine of hope light up the future of humanity. Chinese President Xi Jinping sends a resounding message of solidarity to the world at the Davos Forum.
From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this edition of The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan, live in Beijing. Despite global challenges under COVID-19 resurgence, China's GDP in 2021 expanded 8.1%. That is a pace above the government's target of 6%. On Monday evening, Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed a virtual event of the World Economic Forum. He reaffirmed China's commitment to pursuing high-quality development, reform, and opening up, as well as ecological conservation. CGTN's Feng Yilei filed this report.
President Xi Jinping champions economic globalization to the international community at the World Economic Forum that looks to address critical challenges facing the world today. He referred to changes and pandemic unseen in a century, but said globalization is unstoppable.
Economic globalization is the trend of the times. Though counter-currents are sure to exist in a river, no one can stop it from flowing to the sea. Countries around the world should uphold true multilateralism. We should remove barriers, not erect walls. We should open up, not close off. We should seek integration, not decoupling. This is the way to build an open world economy.
Xi Jinping spoke of China's solution to major pressing issues, how to beat the pandemic and how to rebuild a post-COVID world. He said countries of the world should learn from comparing long history cycles and foster new opportunities on the basis of mutual respect and finding win-win common ground.
Facts have shown once again that amidst the raging torrents of a global crisis, countries are not riding separately in some 190 small boats, but are rather all in a giant ship, carrying our shared destiny.
It is the third time for Xi to stress the importance of upholding openness and solidarity at the forum. Last year, the Chinese president championed multilateralism amid a global crisis. And in 2017, he strongly advocated for economic globalization and warned against protectionism. The Chinese president expressed confidence in China's economy. The latest economic data show that China's growth far exceeded the government's targets last year. Despite economic pressure on the horizon, Xi Jinping says China will not grow at the cost of environment or its people's well-being.
As a rising tide lifts all boats, everyone will get a fair share from development, and development gains will benefit all our people in a more substantial and equitable way.
The Chinese leader also called on the world to do everything necessary to emerge from the shadow of the pandemic and boost economic and social recovery and development. Feng Yilei, CGTN, Beijing.
Now to talk about World Economic Forum's virtual meeting and President Xi's speech, I'm joined by Rebecca Ivey. She's the Chief Representative Officer of the China office at the World Economic Forum. She's currently based in Beijing. So good to have you, Rebecca. Now, we've heard from the Chinese president. What's your takeaway from President Xi's address? Anything stood out for you?
Yes, well, as you are most likely aware, this is the fifth year that President Xi has addressed the World Economic Forum. We had his presence in person in 2017, and of course the world has changed significantly in the past 5 years, but we actually heard some very similar messages from President Xi as we did 5 years ago, which was very much reaffirming China's commitment and interest to see a world that works together more collaboratively and where the multilateral system is really upheld. What I would say we saw or heard yesterday that was quite significantly different from 5 years ago is really this emphasis on climate action and the importance of addressing biodiversity, among other environmental sustainability issues. So, of course, COVID-19 also playing a big part of President Xi's remarks. And it was a very powerful message to kick off our Davos Agenda Week.
Indeed, COVID-19 in general, and Omicron variant in particular, is wreaking havoc around the world, having a huge impact on global economies. President Xi said, amidst the raging torrents of a global crisis. Countries are not riding separately in some 190 small boats, but rather all in a giant ship on which our shared destiny hinges. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's another example of some of the great symbolism that is used in the Chinese leaders' remarks, which really, I think, causes some of those messages to really stick with us. I mean, the World Economic Forum couldn't agree more that we need to face challenges like COVID-19, like climate change together. Perhaps, though, I would make a plug for some of the small boats. I think the way that the World Economic Forum addresses global challenges is not only to look at a nation level, so thinking at the level of those 190 countries, but really looking at all of the other actors in society, be they business, government, civil society, academia. So we really do believe that there are many, many other stakeholders that have a role to play to work together to address these challenges.
Right. Talking about economic challenges, there are many. Supply chain disruptions is obviously one of them. We saw sky-high inflations, for example, in North America, in the U.S. in particular. We just had the Christmas season, and also uneven recovery between the global south and the north, unemployment in many countries, including China. How do you look at some of these economic challenges, and what will be some of the top remedies prescribed by the World Economic Forum in addressing these economic challenges?
Well, it's precisely to address some of those economic challenges that you described that we convene the Davos Agenda Week this week. So we can really hear directly from leaders, from heads of state and government, what are the challenges, and also lay out some of the solutions at a policy level. But we'll also have the chance to hear from CEOs, from heads of NGOs, about some of their potential solutions to address the challenges you just raised. I do believe that the data points are negative in some regards, but the narrative that we build around those data points is as important as the data itself. It's really about being forward-looking and asking, if we're going to rebuild our economies now, what kind of economy, what kind of society do we want to build for ourselves? Building in, for example, a better calculation of environmental resources, rather than purely looking at GDP or purely looking at revenue. So I think there's a chance for the world and also for businesses to reset their calculus of what we want to measure and what we want to achieve collectively.
Indeed, we've heard many leaders, not just the Chinese president, we've heard from the Indian president, we've heard from the UN Secretary General. They're basically rejecting social Darwinism in international relations, saying that there is such a thing as global north-south divide, and countries should pay attention to that when it comes to the divide in technology, vaccination, incomes. Actually, global development index declined for the first time in 30 years. Also, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres pointed out that the global inability to support developing countries in their hour of need, that is the direct quote from the UN Secretary General. How do you think we can reverse that downward spiral?
Well, if we refer back to the World Economic Forum's 2022 risks report, which also came out in the past few days, we do see that alongside of climate action failure and extreme weather events, social cohesion as well as livelihood risks are among the key short-term risks we face in the next 2 years. But interestingly, in the medium term, 2 to 5 years, we already see an evolution of some of those risks, such as livelihood risks, such as debt crises, actually becoming less high on the perception of those advisors and those commentators who really look at risks. So I think what we see is that in the next 2 years, there's a lot of action that needs to be taken to defuse the direct economic and social impact of COVID-19. But in the medium to long term, what we need to do is invest in, for example, digital inclusion to make sure that to prepare for the longer term needs of societies, the longer term needs of workforces, that people are really prepared. So I think that's something that the World Economic Forum is also working closely with stakeholders in China and around the world. We launched the Edison Alliance, which is really focused on bringing 1 billion people online. So we have a lot of initiatives underway to address those longer-term economic and social challenges that you mentioned. Closing the divide between the North and South is incredibly important, and it will require all stakeholders.
Another issue, climate change, that is a limited time offer for nations and governments and people to act. How do you or the World Economic Forum think countries can deliver on their climate pledges?
So it's certainly heartening that countries such as China have set ambitious targets. The way that the World Economic Forum seeks to support businesses to actually meet those expectations is twofold. So on the one hand, we look very much at the supply side. We look at the hard-to-abate industry sector, such as energy, such as mobility and materials. And we're working directly with the Mission Possible Partnership to engage those industries in really looking across their industrial chains to really look not only at what kinds of green technologies could be deployed, but also what kind of financing and investment is needed to help those industries transform as quickly as possible. On the demand side, we also work closely with a coalition, for example, of first movers. These are companies or industries that are more downstream. They have the opportunity to also reshape the kinds of economic products that we deliver by really demanding and insisting that the whole supply chain is as carbon neutral as possible. So we're looking at technology, we're looking at investment and financing, and we're also looking at commitments from both countries as well as companies.
There is a lot the World Economic Forum is currently doing, obviously. Now, I've always wanted to ask you this question. The World Economic Forum has been a fantastic platform, but also, as a student of international relations, history has taught us that it's at the end of the day, most likely, it is down to the national governments, national policymakers, central bank governors, legislatures to implement whatever remedies you may have prescribed for them. Are you sometimes frustrated, you or your colleague at the WEF, at the ability that the WEF or inability the WEF can foster change?
Well, the World Economic Forum is only as strong as our members and partners. So our real focus is actually on building the alliances needed to move action through the resources of our members and partners. So I do believe, on the one hand, we do see the impact of domestic politics on national level policies, the ability to implement and really pursue those key targets. On the other hand, I have a great faith in the many stakeholders and the many actors in society to be working very hard on the sidelines and really pushing issues that used to be on the sidelines into the center of the agenda. So I do actually take an optimistic view that when we take a very short-term view, it seems like we're moving too slowly. But if we look at the medium or the long term, we can actually achieve great things.
Rebecca Ivey, Chief Representative Officer at the China Office of the World Economic Forum, thank you so much for joining us. Come back again. Now, for more on China's economy and the state of the Chinese economy, let's turn to some experts in Singapore. We have Jim Rogers, a world-renowned investor and author. And also in Beijing, we have Yong. He's the Senior Fellow at China Association of International Trade. Welcome, gentlemen. Jim, if I may, let me go to you first. China's GDP expanded 8.1%, according to official data, to $18 trillion in 2021. But the growth has slowed, apparently, quarter by quarter. If you look at the figure, the fourth quarter GDP slowed to just 4%. Do these figures give you more hope or more causes of concern about China's economy?
Well, the whole world has got to start worrying coming up because, we've had a 12-year expansion, which is the longest in American history anyway. So for many reasons, we may be coming to an end. We have inflation coming. Interest rates will be going higher. So we've had a great run, but nothing lasts forever. So we all have to worry, including China.
What specific things are you worried about the Chinese economy and the prospect of the Chinese economy?
Well, China is the largest trading country in the world now, and if your customers have problems, you have problems. Even if China does everything right and their customers run into problems, if Japan or America or Europe or other countries, and they are, then of course it's going to have an effect on China.
Well, Mr. Li, let me go to you. What's your reading of China's GDP figure or figures for the year 2021?
I think that is a significant achievement made by China during the pandemic, especially when the economy is being seriously affected globally, and China is able to achieve it because of the effective control of the pandemic and to of the supply. And China, with that, China is able to substitute some of the supply countries, to supply the goods from China. So that is one of the drivers. I think the other drivers of the economic growth is the China's policies, for example, to encourage the manufacturers to produce and to support those companies that have been adversely affected, to come back to production. And of course, there are other factors, for example, the continued effort to reform and opening up, and the coordination between the central policymakers as well as the local government policymakers, and all those efforts, I think, all in all, contributed to the successful achievement of that goal. And I just want to emphasize that not just the GDP goal, other major targets have also been met,
right?
Such as employment, CPI, and so on and so forth.
Right. There's a whole lot to digest, obviously. Jim, we've heard from the Chinese president during a special virtual meeting at the World Economic Forum, and once again, the Chinese president championed globalization, like he did many times over at the forum. If you remember 2017, when he compared globalization opening up to, not opening up to locking oneself up in the closet. What's your takeaway from the Chinese president's message this time around?
Well, I was delighted to hear him use the words opening up and cooperation several times. It's very good for China and for the world if it's happening. One reason that China has done better is because you have been opening up the new frontiers, one belt, one road, massive amounts of operations and opening in Africa. China's taking advantage of opening up, and with one belt, one road, and the new frontiers and the new opening, and that's one reason China has done relatively better than the rest of us.
Right, but we have a problem, obviously. We have many problems, and Omicron, COVID, is one of them. It is disrupting supply chains, trade, making difficulties for governments to decide if they want to reopen economies. How do you see countries, weathering this storm of COVID?
The world has had epidemics throughout history. Somehow or another we have survived. This time maybe we reacted better or worse, I don't know. Never before did we close McDonald's when we had a virus, but there was lots of closing, and so far the world has weathered it, and it seems that the world is going to be better off next year than last year, at least as far as the virus is concerned, and that will help all of us.
Well, Mr. Lee, what messages did you pick up from the Chinese president's speech last night?
I just want to make a special note that, the Chinese President Xi Jinping's speech in Chinese is just about a little more than 4,000 words. And if you look at the English text, it is 17,000 words.
Wow.
Which means, you see the difference, in Chinese.
Chinese is a more succinct language, arguably.
But anyway, I think, there's a lot of information being embedded in Xi Jinping's message. One is, I think the world need to take, joint effort to deal with the situation, the pandemic, the risk of potential crisis, and the innovation and development issues and so on and so forth. I think that is very important. And the other thing is, I think we need to really read and understand is the three commitments that China has made. For example, high quality development, determination to commit to green development, and so on and so forth. So those are positive messages from China, and also there's a call from China that the world should work together.
Right. Jim, let me turn to you. The Chinese president, along with many world leaders, including the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, talk about this global north-south divide, the divide and division between the developing countries and developed countries. Guterres explicitly said that the developed countries failed to help the developing countries in their hour of need. What do you make of all this?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's factually correct. I mean, look out the window. We all know that. Certainly, as I said before, China has been opening new frontiers and new markets and cooperating probably a lot more. I'm an American, so I don't like to say it, but better than the United States and better than European countries, and they are reaping the benefits. No, America is, I don't like saying it, the last president in America closed off more, and this president is closing off more. That has never been good for anybody and not good for the world.
And, just out of curiosity, what should the current president of the United States policy, going forward vis-a-vis China? Because it looks like that Biden inherited much of Trump's, policies, be it national security, sanctions, trade, tariffs, so on and so forth. Jim.
These guys, listen, I cannot defend the American president, last one or this one. Neither one of them seems to understand what is happening in China or happening in Asia, and how that if we all work together, we can all be much, much more prosperous. I mean, China and America, after like 1980 for several decades, we made a lot of progress together and a lot of prosperity together. They don't seem to understand that anymore, and it worries me.
Do you think people like Joe Biden don't understand this, or they don't have the political space to do that?
I don't see any difference. They don't. Even if they understand, which I don't think they do, the mood in the United States, especially in the last 5 years, whenever things start going wrong in a country, they blame foreigners, and Mr. Trump blamed everything on foreigners. He even blamed the Canadians and the Germans. He blamed everybody. So that mood has set in. It is not good for the United States. It's not good for anybody. And that mood, I hope that Biden would start changing that mood and say, wait, let's get together, let's cooperate. The leader of China said, as I said, he used the word cooperate several times. He used the word opening up several times. I wish somebody would tell Washington, D.C.
Mr. Lee, what do you think?
Because they're not.
I think we are facing a kind of a very interesting situation that is, I think, complicating the global picture economically, politically, and you can see small cliques, small groups being formed against, on a kind of an ideological basis against China, and there are also some other policies that are trying to cut off the relationship, which is called the decoupling. And all those are kind of worrying because, in this world of integration, any effort to divide the world or to decouple, is to be disastrous for sure. And I think people need to be aware of this. And that's why, President Xi Jinping has been advocating solidarity and work together.
Also in his speech, President Xi called for major developed countries to adopt, quote-unquote, responsible economic policies, manage policy spillovers, and avoid severe impacts on developing countries. So, Mr. Li Yong, what specific policies do you think the Chinese president might be referring to? What would be these, responsible economic policies?
Yeah, I think basically we are talking about the economic policies or financial policies being staged by by most of the developing countries. I think for example, the quantitative easing. We are actually looking right now the consequences of the quantitative easing, and then the exit strategies. And some of the countries, are trying to exit the quantitative easing abruptly. So President Xi Jinping advocated that companies should, be careful in making their own economic policies or financial policies, physical or monetary, because all those policies are going to have a global impact. and particularly developing countries are most likely caught short in terms of their response to for example, the turbulences. One notable problem we are facing is the global inflation, which is now in its 10-year high of 4.3%. If you look at the United States, the December number, is 7%, the highest in last 40 years. So those, I think, are the symptoms of the potential risks we are facing, and we need to work together. We need to work, for example, under international organization framework, and to really to consult each other and to come up with an appropriate solution to manage the potential risks and disruptions and problems coming out of the economic policies being made or being considered to make in the developed worlds, in particular.
Right. Jim, how do you look at the Chinese president's call for major developed countries to act responsibly when it comes to implementing their macroeconomic policies?
For goodness sake, I hope somebody listens. The United States, Japan, a few other countries have built up gigantic debts. No country has ever been as deeply in debt as the United States is now. And look at Japan. Japan goes deeper. All these countries are building staggering amounts of debt. Now, somebody's going to have to pay for this. It is good to be old in 2022, because my kids, for instance, are going to have problems in the future with all of this staggering amount of debt which has been built up and all of the staggering amount of money which has been printed. It is leading to inflation. History is very clear. Inflation is going to get worse as long as they do this. And somebody needs to sit down with these guys in Washington or Tokyo, etc., and explain to them, this cannot continue. This is going to lead to serious, serious problems unless somebody does something. I mean, China printed some money, but nothing like Japan or America. China spent some money, but nothing like what we spent in the United States. Somebody's got to teach basic economics and basic history.
Yeah, last time I checked, the U.S. debt stands at over $25 trillion. That is about the size of America's GDP. Now, Mr. Liu, President Xi also talked about the need to explore new drivers of economic growth, new models of social life. How do you think this relates to the Great Reset the World Economic Forum calls upon? And also, if I may, what kind of post-pandemic recovery, globalization, do you foresee?
Yeah, I think, it's great that you mentioned about the word Great Reset, because, that has been an idea being advocated by WEF for some time. And I think it relates to the current structure of governance globally. And it also relates to the governance structure of the major economies. Because, we are actually looking at a shareholder economy. And that actually is the key fundamental driver of the imbalanced development. So FEF advocates stakeholder economy and advise companies to act responsibly in the fashion of the so-called ESG, environment, social, and governance. And also, the governments are advised not to really focus on GDP, but also, on other elements like the environment and so on. So in the future, I think, countries need to really, for example, to seek new drivers from the climate change effort.
We do need to look for new drivers, Mr. Liu. That's all the time we have, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to interrupt, but thank you for joining us on The Hub on CGTN, and thank you for watching. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Bye for now.